Step into Sci-Fi codes where mystery meets imagination. Enjoy the journey, and don't forget to subscribe. Chapter 1: The Immovable Sword. For millennia, the ancient sword had remained embedded in the stone, an enigma to all who beheld it. The villagers told tales passed down through generations, speaking of its mystical power, a relic from an era when gods and mortals walked the earth together. Legends whispered that the sword had been wielded by a mighty champion, a figure whose name had been lost to time, only to be sealed away when the world no longer needed his strength. The hilt, adorned with intricate runes, shimmered faintly under the sunlight, as if beckoning challengers to test their fate. Yet, no one had ever succeeded in pulling it free. Many had tried. Kings, warriors, and even the most powerful of mages had all laid their hands upon the sacred blade, believing themselves to be worthy. They had approached it with confidence, armed with their strength, lineage, and spells of untold power. Yet, each and every one of them had failed, their pride crumbling in the face of an immovable truth: the sword chose its master, and none had yet been deemed worthy. Over time, the act of attempting to draw the sword became a rite of passage, a challenge for those who sought glory. The sword, however, remained steadfast, indifferent to the ambitions of men. Watching from the shadows was the guardian. To the villagers, she was simply a silent sentinel, though none knew her true origins. Tall, elegant, and otherworldly, she had stood by the sword for as long as anyone could remember, her presence as much a mystery as the blade itself. Her violet eyes gleamed with ancient wisdom, and her silver hair cascaded like liquid moonlight. Some whispered she was an elf, others speculated she was a goddess. None dared to ask, for fear of what the answer might be. She had seen countless hopefuls come and go. Some had been arrogant, laughing at the mere thought that they might fail. Others had been desperate, placing all their hopes in the idea that fate would favor them. But the sword had denied them all. The guardian watched them with a knowing gaze, never intervening, never offering guidance. She merely observed, waiting for the one who would finally break the cycle. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the ancient clearing, she sensed something different. A shift in the air, a whisper of change carried on the wind. Her gaze sharpened. Another challenger was coming. But this time felt different. Chapter 2: The Unlikely Challenger. The latest contender approached, his steps quiet but sure. He was unlike the others, his attire simple, a weathered cloak draped over his shoulders, boots caked with dust from long journeys. He bore no shining armor, no emblem of noble heritage. His hands were rough, the hands of a laborer rather than a warrior. His presence did not demand attention, yet there was something in the way he carried himself, an aura of quiet determination that piqued the guardian's interest. He stopped before the sword, gazing upon it as though seeing an old friend rather than a prize to be won. There was no greed in his eyes, no desperate longing for power. He simply stared, as if weighing something deep within himself. The guardian smirked, folding her arms across her chest. "You think you can succeed where kings and warriors have failed?" The man turned to her, his hazel eyes steady and unshaken. "Maybe." She tilted her head, intrigued. He did not boast, nor did he shrink away. Most who came before the sword brimmed with arrogance or despair. This one was different. There was a quiet strength about him, an unwavering resolve that set him apart from the countless others she had watched. "Very well," she said, stepping aside with a theatrical sweep of her arm. "Show us what you're capable of." The man approached the sword, his movements deliberate and composed. He did not reach for it in haste, did not tremble in uncertainty. He placed his hands on the hilt, his fingers brushing over the ancient runes as though tracing a story written in time itself. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then he pulled. Chapter 3: The Sword Awakens. The world seemed to pause. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen force. The earth itself seemed to shudder in anticipation, as if holding its breath. The guardian watched, expecting the familiar sight of failure, the tightening of muscles, the frustration in their eyes, the inevitable moment when they realized they were not worthy. But then, something different happened. The runes on the hilt glowed. It was a faint shimmer at first, almost imperceptible, but then the light grew, radiating outward in golden brilliance. The stone that had imprisoned the blade for millennia groaned, cracks forming along its surface. A deep hum resonated through the clearing, a sound so ancient and powerful that it sent shivers down the guardian's spine. She took an involuntary step forward, her violet eyes widening. This had never happened before. The man's jaw clenched, his muscles straining, yet he did not waver. The energy in the air thickened, pulsing with each heartbeat. And then, with a final, mighty effort, the sword came free. A burst of radiant light engulfed the clearing, momentarily blinding all who bore witness. The runes along the blade shimmered like liquid fire, the power within them no longer dormant. The man stood there, the sword in his hands, its weight balanced perfectly in his grip. He looked at it with something between awe and disbelief. For the first time in centuries, the Guardian was speechless. Chapter 4: The Guardian's Laughter. Disbelief flickered in the Guardian's expression, quickly giving way to something unexpected: laughter. It began as a soft chuckle, then swelled into full, joyous laughter that echoed through the clearing. It was the kind of laughter that had not left her lips in an age, a sound that seemed almost foreign to her own ears. The man furrowed his brow. "What's so funny?" She wiped a tear from her eye, shaking her head. You actually did it." She exhaled, still grinning. "Of all the people, it had to be you." He frowned, glancing at the blade. "I don't understand." "The sword chooses its wielder," she said, her tone softer now, less mocking. "It's never been about strength or lineage. It's about heart. And yours, it seems, is truer than most." The man absorbed her words, his grip on the hilt firm yet reverent. "Then what happens now?" She stepped closer, gazing at him with something that almost resembled admiration. "Now, you've earned a destiny. That blade is more than a weapon, it's a beacon, a symbol of hope. Wield it wisely, for it will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine." The man nodded, his resolve unwavering. "I will." The Guardian watched as he turned, the legendary sword gleaming under the sun. For the first time in ages, she felt something stir within her, a hope she had long thought lost. Perhaps, at last, the world had found its true champion. Chapter 5: A New Dawn. Months passed, and the legend of the man and his sword spread like wildfire across the lands. He became more than just a name, he was a wandering hero, a symbol of hope in an age plagued by darkness. Word of his deeds reached the ears of kings and commoners alike, and his story was shared in hushed whispers around fires, in crowded taverns, and even in the hearts of those who had long since given up on the possibility of change. He fought not only with the strength of his arm but with the wisdom of a mind tempered by hardship and sorrow. In every battle, he sought not to conquer, but to protect, not to destroy, but to rebuild. His sword was sharp, yes, but it was his words that truly struck the hearts of those who heard them. He challenged the corrupt officials who used their power to oppress the helpless, and he stood against the tyrants whose rule had brought fear to the people. Yet, it was not his victories in combat that people spoke of most, it was his compassion, his unwavering belief in the goodness of others. Wherever he went, he left behind more than just a trail of fallen enemies. He inspired hope in the hopeless, courage in the fearful, and a belief in justice in those who had long forgotten what it meant to be free. His deeds were never born from a desire for fame or recognition, rather, they came from a quiet conviction that the world could be better, if only people were willing to believe in it. In a small village nestled between rolling hills, the Guardian remained, watching from afar. Though she had fulfilled her duty and set him on his path, her connection to the sword still lingered in her heart. She had spent centuries guarding the blade, waiting for the one who would wield it with honor. For so long, she had been bound by her purpose, her duty a chain that kept her from moving forward. Yet now, for the first time in an age, she felt no burden. The sword was no longer a monument to failure, but a beacon for change, its glow brighter with every story of the man's triumphs. One quiet evening, as she sat by a tranquil stream, her eyes turned upward to the heavens. The stars shimmered in the clear sky, each one a distant reminder of the countless years she had watched over the earth. In the silence of the night, a voice echoed softly in her mind, a voice she had not heard in many long years. "You doubted him," the voice said, ancient and wise, carrying the weight of time itself. "I did," she admitted, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I questioned whether he would truly understand what the sword was meant to protect. But he proved me wrong. He is everything I hoped for and more. And that, the voice replied with a warmth that seemed to encompass the entire world, is the true magic of humanity. The capacity for growth, for change, for redemption. The guardian laughed softly, the sound like the rustling of leaves in the wind. Her violet eyes shimmered with something new, something that had not been there before. For the first time in eons, she allowed herself to dream of a brighter future, one where the world no longer needed her to be a silent sentinel, but where its people could rise on their own. As the night deepened, she closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her ancient existence lighten, if only for a moment. The sword had found its true purpose, and in doing so, so had she. No longer would she be defined by the past, by the mistakes of those who came before her. The man had given her something that no magic or prophecy ever could, hope. And in the flicker of that hope, a new dawn began to break, painting the horizon with the soft hues of possibility. Chapter 6: The Road to Unity. The man's journey continued, sweeping him across the lands like a tide, unrelenting and powerful. With every passing day, his reputation grew, not as a lone warrior, but as a harbinger of change, a figure who sought to unite the fractured kingdoms and peoples torn apart by years of war and strife. His presence, both a calm and a storm, drew together those who had lost faith in the possibility of peace, showing them that unity, though difficult, was not an impossible dream. One evening, as he rode into a village near the borderlands, he encountered a band of rebels, weary and battered from years of fighting. The man's arrival was not met with open arms, for the rebels saw him as yet another champion of a distant crown, another tool of the elites. But when he spoke, they listened. His voice was not one of a conqueror, but of a man who had seen the ravages of war firsthand and longed for something more. His words were not filled with promises of glory, but with the hope of something simpler, peace. "I've seen enough bloodshed," he said, his gaze steady. "The world will never heal if we continue to fight amongst ourselves. The true enemy is not the one standing before you. It's the divisions that have kept us apart for too long." For days, he stayed with them, listening to their struggles, understanding their pain. He shared his own journey, of the sword that had once been a symbol of failure, and how it had now become a tool for building something greater. Through his humility and sincerity, he slowly gained their trust, until they were no longer enemies, but allies in the struggle for a better world. When he left, the rebels did not follow him, but they made a promise, one that they would carry with them long after he had gone. They would seek peace, not through violence, but through dialogue. They would lay down their arms, not in surrender, but in hope that unity might one day be achieved. Meanwhile, the guardian watched from her quiet refuge, her heart swelling with pride. She had known, deep down, that the man was not just a warrior, but a true leader. He had the ability to see the world not as it was, but as it could be. And for the first time in ages, the guardian felt the stirrings of something long forgotten, a sense of belonging to the world, not as a guardian, but as a part of something greater. The man's journey was far from over, but with every step, he brought them closer to the dawn of a new age. Chapter 7: The Turning Tide. As the seasons shifted and time marched on, the man's efforts began to bear fruit in unexpected ways. The lands that had once been divided by hatred and mistrust now saw the glimmer of cooperation. Allies were made, treaties signed, and people who had once been bitter enemies found common ground. But it was not just through diplomacy that change took root, it was through the example set by the man himself. His reputation continued to spread, and where once he was seen as a mere wandering hero, he was now a symbol of the potential for redemption in all. People began to look to him not just for protection, but for guidance. It was said that wherever he went, there was no division, no hierarchy. He treated every person, no matter their status, with the same respect. The poorest beggar was as worthy of his time as the mightiest lord, and in doing so, he dismantled the walls of pride and arrogance that had kept people apart for so long. One evening, as the man sat beside a campfire in the heart of a newly allied kingdom, a weary traveler approached. His clothes were torn, and his face was weathered by years of hardship. The traveler spoke of a new threat rising in the east, a shadow that seemed to grow with each passing day, threatening to undo all the progress that had been made. "It's the remnants of the old world," the traveler said, his voice low and anxious. "The corrupt leaders who still hold power in secret, the warlords who want nothing more than to plunge the world back into chaos." The man stood, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He could feel the weight of this new challenge bearing down on him, but he was not afraid. It was not the first time he had faced an enemy hidden in the shadows, and it would not be the last. He knew that even as peace began to take root, darkness would always seek to undo it. But what he had learned through his journey was that light, once kindled, could never truly be extinguished. "I won't stop," he said, his voice unwavering. "No matter the cost. This is not just my fight, it's everyone's fight. We are not defined by the darkness that threatens us, but by the light we carry within." As he prepared to set out once more, the guardian appeared before him in a vision, her violet eyes shimmering with a new purpose. "Your journey is far from over," she said softly. "But you are not alone. You never have been." The man smiled, his heart lifted by her words. In that moment, he understood. The sword, once a symbol of the past, was now a key to the future. It was not only his strength that would see this world through its trials, but the strength of the people who believed in the change he sought. And together, they would face whatever darkness lay ahead, for the dawn was rising.